Hi, my name is Randy, and today we're here to epoxy fill some glass mosaic art piece that my wife did. And normally she would fill it with grout, but in this case the lines between the glass is very fine, so we decided we'd rather fill this with, and she wanted to be tougher over the long term than grout, so we decided we would use a epoxy filler to fill this. The epoxy filler we're going to make from a modern resin. You can buy commercially available epoxy fillers, but in my opinion most of those are made from resins, some of them going back as far as 30 years, and so they really aren't, they've made a lot of headways in resins over the last few years, and so we can get, I believe we can get better resins, and we can also control exactly the properties of the filler that we want by actually using a modern resin that we buy separately and build it up. In this case, we're going to use a 2-part epoxy resin that mixes 2 to 1. This is the resin, this is the hardener. And this particular resin is a UV stabilized resin, which means that if we put the art piece outdoors, the ultraviolet light from the sun will not attack the resin and degrade it, nor will it discolor it. You'll notice this has a blue tinge. That doesn't always indicate this, but in this case it indicates this also has what they call a whitener added to it, which means that when you tint it white, it tends to be whiter than if it was like an amber colored resin, which I have another resin that I use as amber color. Another reason we chose this particular resin is that it has a half-hour cure time. So that's just about right for what we want to do with it here. And they make it at all different cure times from 5 minutes up to several days to fully cure. So anyway, this particular resin's half-hour cure time, and it's a UV stabilized resin with a addition of a whitener. We'll need a mixing cup to mix it in. We'll need some mixing sticks. I just use popsicle sticks or tongue depressors. We'll also need some pigment. You buy these pigments that are actually specifically made for tinting epoxy, and I have them in all colors. In this particular instance, we're going to be using white and black. Now black, because we're making a gray tinted epoxy, the black we'll use like 1 drop off of we'll take a toothpick and just add 1 drop to the stuff, and it'll probably get it about the right gray that we want. In the case of the white, we're going to mix about 75 grams of resin, because our art piece is about roughly 12 inches square, and I figured it'd take about 75 grams to fill it. And we'll use about a 1/4 teaspoon of white pigment in that. Another thing is, this particular resin is a low viscosity resin, so it's basically a little too runny to use for the art piece that we're doing today. We want it to be slightly thicker. And to thicken all epoxy resins, you use a powdery product called Cab-o-sil. CAB-O-SIL, Cab-o-sil. And it's basically just a thickener. We could also add a filler if we wanted. In other words, if the gaps were a little bigger and we didn't want to use grout, but we still wanted to use an epoxy instead, we could use either, they make colored sand fillers, or you can just buy sand and color it. What I normally use though is I normally use a product which is basically ground up glass. It's called milled glass fibers, and they happen to be ground. This particular stuff that I normally use is ground to 70 micron. That's the size of the individual glass particles. The reason I like using milled glass is because I don't have to have it tinted. It will take on whatever tint I put in the resin. So I can make it virtually any color I want by using that combination of products. Then when it comes time to clean up, we're going to need some rags, various rags. These are basically a paper shop towel, or this is a cloth shop towel to clean up, basically to clean the epoxy on the surface of the glass. We don't want any epoxy covering it in this case. We could use a potting epoxy or use it as potting, use a clear epoxy to cover the whole thing if we wanted, but that's not what we're going to do in this particular case. And so we'll need glass cloths to actually wipe the excess epoxy off the top of the glass and to clean the glass. And as a solvent, we will use regular denatured alcohol that you buy at a hardware store. In fact, if you wanted to, if your epoxy was a little too thick for the purpose that you wanted to do, you could actually slightly thin it with denatured alcohol. The only other thing is we're going to, of course, use some tape to tape up the outside of the work where we don't want the epoxy to go, and also to keep it so that the edges of the glass on this particular piece, the epoxy won't run out the sides. And we're going to want to wear rubber gloves because the epoxies have come a long ways in the last few years. They used to be, the epoxies would cause a lot higher chance that they would cause an allergic reaction. But I'd rather be safe than sorry, so I always wear, and it's less messy if I just wear rubber gloves. So let's get the art piece out, get it prepped, and get started. All right, here we are. We're ready to fill this with stained glass mosaic with epoxy filler. We've taken some UV stabilized epoxy and thickened it with Cab-o-sil and dyed it the color we want, which in this case is a light gray. It should be just about this thickness, so it just runs. So we carefully apply it. Get some out there to work with. Now we take a rubber squeegee and work it in there in all different directions. That'll get the air worked out. We hope we mixed enough epoxy because we'd never get this color matched again. Need more. Got about a half an hour to work with this. Perfect amount. Go back and forth. There. Now, Oopsie. Yeah. She's done. Now we'll just have to let it get hard. And then wipe it down with alcohol again. Or not hard, but tacked off. Those are pretty clean already. Okay. Now we're back. It's been about a half an hour. We've got a nice clean towel soaked in denatured alcohol. Now we just gotta, the resin has actually gotten, it's not hard, but it's partially cured. This is a good point to go and get all of the resin that might be on top of the tiles off. So we'll carefully wipe them down. And then we'll just let it finish curing and it'll be done. This will be ready to put in a frame. Lint on here that you can actually brush that off after it cures from the lint from the rag. Mainly want to be sure we get all the tops of the glass clean now. At this point it's just got a real thin film of resin on it. It comes off real easy with denatured alcohol. There. All done. Okay, so here it is the next day, and we've let our piece cure overnight. In this case, she wanted to put it in like a picture frame. So we mounted it in the frame, and here it is, all finished. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and we'll try to answer your questions there. Thank you.